You wake up tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because your life feels like it's moving in circles. You work, you earn, you spend, you repeat. And somewhere deep inside, there's a quiet question you try not to hear. Why does it feel like I'm always reacting while others are moving ahead? Because most people are playing defense with money, while the wealthy are playing offense. And that single difference changes everything. In this audiobook, Why the Rich Play Offense, understand and apply the psychology of money. You're going to uncover not just how money works, but how your mind works around money, because money is never just numbers. It's behavior, it's emotion, it's identity. And if you don't understand the psychology behind it, you can work hard for years and still feel stuck. Over the next chapters, you'll discover how the wealthy think differently, how they manage risk, how they use time, how they build momentum instead of reacting to life, and most importantly, how you can begin applying these principles starting today. This is not financial advice. This is education, awareness, and mindset training. Because the real gap between rich and broke is not income, it's perspective. Here's a line I want you to remember, one you might come back to long after this audiobook ends. Poor people try to survive money. Rich people learn to direct it. Let that sit with you, because everything you're about to hear builds on that idea. And before we begin, let me ask you something honestly. If money disappeared from your life today, would your habits rebuild it, or would your habits destroy you again? That's the real question. Because wealth is not something you earn once. It's something your behavior either sustains or silently erodes. And that brings us to where this journey truly begins. Not in your bank account, but in your mind. Chapter 1. The invisible game you've been playing your entire life. Most people don't realize they've been playing a game, a silent game, a psychological game, one where the rules were never explained, but the consequences are very real. From the moment you were young, you absorbed beliefs about money. Maybe money was stressful. Maybe it was scarce. Maybe it was something that came and went, never something that stayed. And without realizing it, those early beliefs became your operating system. You didn't choose them, but you live by them. You see, money habits are rarely logical. They're emotional patterns. That's why someone can earn more and still feel broke. That's why someone can win the lottery and lose everything within a few years. Because money doesn't change who you are, it amplifies it. If you are impulsive, money makes you more impulsive. If you are disciplined, money makes you more powerful. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think the goal is to earn more, but earning more without understanding your psychology is like pouring water into a leaking bucket. You feel temporary progress, but long-term frustration. That's why you see people earning 6 figures, living paycheck to paycheck. That's why you see people constantly upgrading their lifestyle, but never building real freedom. Because they're playing defense, always reacting, always catching up, always one unexpected expense away from stress. And deep down, they know it, they feel it, that quiet anxiety when a bill comes in, that hesitation before checking their bank account, that subtle tension that never fully goes away. Because defense is exhausting. Defense means you're always one step behind. But offense is different. Offense means you're thinking ahead. You're building systems. You're creating space. You're not asking, can I survive this month? You're asking, how do I make next year easier? And that shift is everything. One of the most powerful insights you'll ever understand is that money is less about math and more about behavior, as echoed in powerful financial discussions like ignorance, not lack of intelligence, is what keeps most people stuck financially. Think about that. Not stupidity, not bad luck, just not knowing how the game actually works, and more importantly, not knowing how they themselves behave inside that game. Because you can learn strategies, you can learn investments, you can learn systems, but if your behavior is unstable, if your emotions take control, if your identity doesn't match growth, you will sabotage yourself every time, quietly, consistently, predictably. So before we talk about building wealth, we need to talk about something deeper, your relationship with money. Ask yourself, do you see money as a tool or as a reward? Do you see saving as restriction or as power? Do you see investing as risk or as opportunity? Your answers matter because they define your actions, and your actions define your future. Let me tell you a story. There are two people. Both earn the same income, both live in the same city, both have access to the same opportunities. But 10 years later, their lives look completely different. One is stressed, still working constantly, still chasing stability. The other has options, freedom, time. And the difference was not luck. It was behavior. The first person spent to feel progress. The second person invested to create it. The first person reacted to life. The second person prepared for it. The first person played defense. The second played offense. And here's the part most people miss. The second person didn't necessarily work harder. They just thought differently. They understood something early on. That money is not about what you earn. It's about what you keep, what you control, and what you grow. And that leads us to a truth that might challenge you. You don't rise to the level of your income, you fall to the level of your habits. Let that sink in. Because if your habits don't change, your future won't either, no matter how much money you make. So in this audiobook, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about identity. We're talking about discipline. We're talking about awareness, because those are the real drivers of wealth. Not luck, not shortcuts, not trends. And as you continue listening, I want you to stay honest with yourself. Not judgmental, not critical, just aware. Because awareness is the first step to change. And change is what separates those who stay stuck from those who build something real. If this already feels like it's hitting something inside you, take a second, pause, and make a small commitment to yourself, not to me, to yourself, that you're going to listen fully, that you're going to reflect honestly, that you're going to apply at least one idea from each chapter, because information without action is just noise, and you're not here for noise. You're here for transformation. And in the next chapter, we're going to break down the first major shift that separates those who struggle financially from those who build real wealth over time. A shift so simple, but so ignored, that most people never even realize it's the reason they're stuck. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Chapter 2. The difference between reaction and intention. Most people don't plan their financial life. They respond to it. A bill shows up. They react. A sale appears. They react. A paycheck lands. They react. And slowly, without ever making a conscious decision, Their entire financial life becomes a series of reactions, not direction, not strategy, just response. And here's the dangerous part. Reaction feels normal. It feels like life. It feels like this is just how things are. But what you don't see is how much control you're giving away every time you react instead of decide. Because reaction is emotional. Intention is strategic. Reaction says, I'll deal with it when it comes. Intention says, I'm preparing before it arrives. And this is where the wealthy separate themselves early. They don't wait for problems to show up. They expect them. They prepare for them. They design their life in advance. Think about that for a second. Most people are surprised by expenses. The wealthy assume them. Most people hope nothing goes wrong. The wealthy build systems in case it does. Most people ask, what do I have left at the end of the month? The wealthy ask, what am I keeping before the month even begins? That's a fence, and it starts with one simple shift. You stop treating money like something that happens to you and start treating it like something you control. Because here's a truth that most people avoid. If you don't tell your money where to go, it will disappear without asking, quietly, effortlessly, and you'll sit there wondering where it all went, again and again and again. This is why budgeting isn't about restriction. It's about awareness. It's about direction. It's about taking control of the narrative instead of being dragged by it. But most people resist this. Why? Because intention requires responsibility. And responsibility is uncomfortable. It forces you to face reality. It forces you to admit where you've been careless. It forces you to see patterns you've been avoiding. And that's not easy, but it's necessary, because you cannot fix what you refuse to see. Let me give you an example. Two people receive the same paycheck. The first person spends first and saves what's left. The second person saves first and spends what's left. Same income. Different outcome. Why? Because one is reacting, the other is directing, and over time, that small difference becomes massive. Years later, one person is still asking, why am I not getting ahead? The other is asking, what's my next move? That's the power of intention. And here's something that might shift how you think. Saving money is not about being cheap. It's about buying freedom. Let that sink in. Every dollar you keep is a piece of independence. Every dollar you waste is a piece of your future you gave away. And as highlighted in conversations around financial behavior, debt is not just numbers. It's ownership over your future. That means every impulsive decision, every unnecessary expense, every moment of emotional spending, it's not just about today, it's about tomorrow. Because money compounds, not just in growth, but in mistakes. A small habit repeated over years becomes a life outcome. And that's why this chapter matters so much. Because intention is not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. It's choosing awareness over autopilot. It's choosing clarity over comfort. It's choosing long-term peace over short-term pleasure. And let's be honest, that's not easy in today's world. You're surrounded by distractions, constant ads, endless content. Social media turning spending into entertainment, everything designed to make you react instantly, buy now, click now, upgrade now, and before you even realize it, you're back in the cycle, working, earning, spending, repeating. But here's the difference. Once you become aware of it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing your impulses, you start questioning your decisions, you start pausing instead of reacting. And that pause, that small moment of awareness, That's where your power is, because in that moment, you get to choose, not your habits, not your emotions, you. And that's where offense begins, not with money, but with control. Control over your choices, control over your direction, control over your future. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a financial decision that your future self would thank you for? Not your current self, your future self. Because that's the real game. The wealthy are not constantly asking, what do I want right now? They're asking, what will matter later? And that shift is what builds wealth quietly, consistently, powerfully. Now, here's something else to understand. Playing offense doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means being aware enough to correct them, to adjust, to learn, because mistakes are inevitable. But staying stuck in the same pattern, that's a choice. And if you're listening to this right now, you're already making a different choice. You're choosing awareness. You're choosing growth. You're choosing to understand the game instead of blindly playing it. And that matters more than you think. So here's a simple challenge for you. Starting today, before every financial decision, pause just for a second and ask yourself one question. Is this reaction or intention? That's it, one question. Because that question will change your behavior, and your behavior will change your life. If this is resonating with you, if you're starting to see your own patterns more clearly, take a moment, lock it in. You can even comment later with the one habit you realized you need to change, not for validation, for accountability. Because awareness without action is just potential wasted. And you're not here to waste potential, you're here to build something real. Now, in the next chapter, we're going deeper into something even more powerful. Something that silently controls most people's financial life without them realizing it. Your identity. Because money doesn't just follow your actions. It follows who you believe you are. And once you understand that, everything starts to shift. Chapter 3. Your identity is your financial ceiling. Most people think money changes identity. But the truth is, identity controls money. You don't rise into wealth. You grow into it. And if your identity isn't aligned with wealth, you will reject it, sabotage it, or lose it. Not consciously, but consistently. Because your brain is wired for familiarity, not success. It wants what feels normal, even if normal is stress, even if normal is struggle, even if normal is living paycheck to paycheck. That's what makes this so dangerous, because you can say you want more, but if your identity says, this is just who I am, you'll keep recreating the same results, different months, same patterns. That's why you see people earn more, but stay stuck. They upgrade their income, but they never upgrade their identity. And so their behavior pulls them back. Every time. Let me show you how this works. If you believe I'm bad with money, you won't even try to improve. If you believe I never have enough, you'll act out of scarcity even when you have more. If you believe money always disappears, you'll unconsciously prove that belief true again and again. Because your actions follow your identity, not your intentions. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept. You don't get what you want, you get what you believe you deserve. Let that sit with you. Because this is where the shift begins. The wealthy don't just think differently about money, they think differently about themselves. They see themselves as someone who manages money, someone who builds, someone who grows, someone who controls outcomes, instead of reacting to them And because of that identity, their actions follow, naturally, consistently, without constant struggle. But for most people, there's a disconnect. They want wealth, but they don't see themselves as someone who can sustain it. So they chase it emotionally instead of building it structurally. And that leads to cycles, high effort, short bursts of progress, then back to old habits, back to old patterns, back to the same place. And it's exhausting because it feels like you're trying, but not moving. That's identity resistance. And until you address it, nothing else sticks. So how do you change it? You don't start with money. You start with awareness. You start by listening to your internal dialogue. What do you say to yourself about money? What stories do you repeat? What patterns do you justify? Because those stories, they're shaping everything quietly, powerfully. And once you see them, you can begin to challenge them, not with fake positivity, not with empty affirmations, but with evidence, real evidence, small wins, small changes, small proofs that you are becoming someone new. Because identity doesn't change overnight. It evolves through action, through consistency, through repetition. Let's make this practical. Instead of saying, I'm bad with money, you shift to, I'm learning how to manage money better, instead of, I never have enough. You shift to, I'm building control over what I have. Instead of, I can't save. You shift to, I'm becoming someone who saves. It sounds simple, but it's powerful. Because now, you're not fighting yourself. You're aligning with growth. And that alignment, that's where momentum begins. Because once your identity starts shifting, your decisions start changing. You hesitate before impulsive spending. You think twice before unnecessary upgrades. You start valuing stability over appearance. You start choosing long-term over short-term. Not because you have to, but because it feels right. That's identity transformation. And it's subtle, but it's everything. Because here's the truth most people never hear. Wealth is not built through extreme actions. It's built through consistent identity-based behavior. Day after day, decision after decision, quietly, and over time, it compounds, just like money does. Now let's go deeper. Why do so many people stay stuck in the same financial patterns? Because changing identity requires discomfort. It requires letting go of old habits, old beliefs, old versions of yourself. And that's not easy. Because those patterns feel safe, even when they're limiting, even when they're holding you back. Your brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar growth. And that's why most people don't change. Not because they can't, but because they won't push through that discomfort. But you're here, you're listening, which means something in you is ready to shift, ready to grow, ready to step into something different. And that matters, because the moment you decide, I'm not that person anymore, everything begins to change, slowly at first, then faster, then naturally. And one day, you look back and realize you don't even think the same way anymore. That's how identity works. Not dramatic, not loud, but powerful. Now here's something I want you to reflect on. Who are you when it comes to money? Not who you want to be, not who you pretend to be. Who are you right now? Be honest. Because that answer is your current ceiling. But it's not permanent. It's just your starting point. And starting points can change if you choose to change them. So here's your next step. Define the identity you want to build. Not in vague terms, not in fantasies, in behavior. I am someone who saves consistently. I am someone who thinks long term. I am someone who controls my spending, make it real, make it actionable. Because identity without behavior is just imagination. And you're not here to imagine a better life. You're here to build one, piece by piece, decision by decision. And in the next chapter, we're going to uncover something that silently destroys financial progress for most people. Something that feels harmless, but slowly erodes everything you're trying to build. Comparison. Because in today's world, it's not just about how you manage money. It's about how you feel when you see how others spend it. And that changes everything. Dear friend, you are definitely on the right track if you are watching this video. Like, subscribe, and write in the comments which topic or problem concerns you the most. We promise to prepare a professional video explanation at your request. Chapter 4. The Silent Trap of Comparison. There is a quiet force shaping your financial decisions every single day, and most people don't even realize it's there. It doesn't show up as logic. It doesn't show up as strategy. It shows up as emotion. Comparison. You scroll through your phone, and suddenly your life feels smaller. Someone is traveling. Someone just bought a new car. Someone is upgrading their home. Someone is celebrating success. And without thinking, you start measuring. Not your goals, but your position. And that's where the problem begins. Because comparison doesn't just change how you feel. It changes how you spend. It changes how you think. It changes how you move. Quietly, subtly, dangerously. You see, most people don't spend money to improve their life. They spend money to keep up with what they see. And in a world where everything is visible, that pressure never stops. It's constant, endless, relentless. And if you're not aware of it, you'll start making decisions that have nothing to do with your future and everything to do with someone else's present. That's how people go broke trying to look rich. That's how people sacrifice peace for perception. That's how people build lifestyles they can't actually sustain. And here's the truth that cuts deep. You are not comparing yourself to reality. You are comparing yourself to a highlight reel. Think about that. You don't see their debt. You don't see their stress. You don't see the pressure behind the image. You only see the outcome. And then you judge your entire life against it. That's not fair. But more importantly, it's not accurate. And yet, it influences you more than you realize. You start upgrading things you don't need. You justify purchases that don't serve you. You tell yourself, I deserve this. But deep down, you know it's not about need. It's about emotion. It's about keeping up. And that's where financial discipline starts to break. Because comparison creates urgency. And urgency kills logic. It pushes you to act now. Instead of think long term, it makes you feel behind even when you're actually progressing. And that feeling, that subtle sense of not enough, is one of the most expensive emotions you can carry because it drives behavior. Expensive behavior. Now let's connect this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, you're reacting to comparison. You're adjusting your life based on what you see. You're constantly trying to catch up, but when you're playing offense, you ignore the noise. You define your own path. You measure progress based on your goals, not someone else's timeline. That's power, that's control, that's clarity, and it's rare because most people never step out of the comparison loop. They stay trapped in it, scrolling, reacting, spending, repeating, And over time, it drains them financially, emotionally, mentally. So how do you break it? You start by redefining what success actually means to you. Not what social media says, not what society expects, what you want. Because if you don't define success, you'll borrow someone else's and live a life that doesn't even belong to you. Let that hit you. Because that's happening to more people than you think. They're chasing goals they didn't choose, spending money they don't need, trying to impress people who aren't even paying attention, and at the end of it, they feel empty because it was never aligned, it was never intentional, it was never real. So here's a shift you need to make from external validation to internal direction. Instead of asking, how do I compare? You start asking, what actually matters to me? Instead of, what should I have by now? You ask, what am I building long term? And that shift, that one mental shift, changes everything. Because now, your decisions are grounded, your spending is intentional, your progress is real, not performative, not reactive, not emotional. And here's something else to understand. The wealthy don't win because they have more. They win because they stay focused. Focused on their path, focused on their plan, focused on their priorities. They're not constantly distracted by what others are doing. They're too busy building, quietly, consistently. And that's something echoed across high-performance thinking patterns. The people who succeed long-term are the ones who stop looking sideways and start looking forward. Because every time you look sideways, you lose momentum, you lose clarity, you lose direction. But when you stay focused, you build something real. Now let me ask you something honestly. How many financial decisions have you made because of what you saw someone else doing? Not because you needed it, not because it aligned with your goals, but because it felt like you should. Be honest. Because that awareness is where change begins. And from this moment forward, I want you to try something simple. Every time you feel the urge to buy something, pause and ask yourself, would I still want this if nobody else could see it? That question will expose everything, because real value doesn't need an audience, and real wealth doesn't need to be displayed. It needs to be built, protected, grown, and that's exactly what we're moving into next. Because in the next chapter, we're going to break down one of the most misunderstood ideas about money. Something that sounds positive, but can quietly destroy your progress if you don't understand it. The idea of earning more. Because more income does not automatically mean more wealth. And once you see why, you'll never look at money the same way again. Chapter 5. Why more income doesn't fix the problem. There's a belief that almost everyone carries at some point in their life. If I just made more money, everything would be easier. It sounds logical, it feels true, and in some ways, it is. More income can create opportunities, it can reduce pressure, it can give you options. But here's the truth most people discover too late. More income does not solve bad behavior, it amplifies it. Let that sink in. Because this is where many people get trapped. They focus all their energy on earning more, but never learn how to handle what they already have. And when the income increases, so do their problems, just at a higher level. Bigger paychecks, bigger expenses, bigger mistakes, same stress, different numbers. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the quietest wealth killers in the modern world. Because it doesn't feel like a problem, it feels like progress. you start earning more, so you upgrade your life. Better phone, better car, better apartment, more experiences, more convenience. And on the surface, it looks like success. But underneath, nothing has changed. You're still spending everything you make, still living on the edge, still dependent on the next paycheck. And here's the painful part. You worked harder, but didn't move forward. That's what happens when income grows. But discipline stays the same, and this pattern is everywhere. People chasing promotions, not to build wealth, but to support a more expensive lifestyle. People increasing their income, but never increasing their control. And over time, they become trapped in a cycle that looks successful, but feels exhausting, because now they have more to maintain, more to protect, more to worry about, and less room for mistakes. That's not freedom, that's pressure, disguised as progress. Now compare that to someone playing offense. When their income increases, they don't immediately upgrade their lifestyle. They upgrade their position. They increase their savings. They increase their investments. They create margin. They create space because they understand something simple. Income is what you earn. Wealth is what you keep. And if you don't learn to keep it, you'll always feel like you're starting over, no matter how much you make. And this is exactly why financial behavior matters more than financial opportunity. Because opportunity without discipline leads to chaos, while discipline without opportunity still leads to progress, slow progress, but real progress. Now let's take this deeper. Why do people increase their spending when they earn more? It's not just habit. It's psychology. You feel like you've earned it. You want to reward yourself. You want your lifestyle to reflect your effort. And that's human. That's natural. But if it's not controlled, it becomes destructive. Because now, your expenses rise to meet your income, and your freedom stays exactly the same. You're just operating at a higher level of pressure. That's the trap. And most people never escape it. Because it feels good in the moment. It feels like growth. But long term, it keeps you stuck. Now here's a shift that can change everything. Instead of asking, what can I afford now? Start asking, what can I keep growing? That question moves you from consumption to creation, from short-term satisfaction to long-term strategy. And that's where real wealth begins, because wealth is not built in big moments. It's built in small decisions, repeated consistently over time. Choosing not to upgrade immediately, choosing to invest instead of spend, choosing to delay gratification. Those choices don't feel exciting. They don't feel impressive. But they are powerful because they compound. And over time, they create something most people never reach. Options, freedom, peace. And as discussed in deeper conversations about money psychology, what people are truly seeking is not money itself. It's the freedom and independence that money can provide, not the appearance of wealth, but the feeling of control. And you don't get that from spending more. You get that from managing better, from thinking long-term, from playing offense. So here's something to reflect on. If your income doubled tomorrow, what would actually change? Would you build more security or just a more expensive life? Be honest, because that answer reveals your current mindset. And mindset is what determines your future. Now, this doesn't mean you can't enjoy your money. It doesn't mean you have to live restricted. It means you have to be intentional, because there's a difference between enjoying money and being controlled by it. One creates freedom, the other creates dependency, and the line between them is discipline. So here's a simple principle to carry forward. As your income grows, let your lifestyle grow slowly, but let your investments grow aggressively. That's how you create imbalance in your favor. That's how you build momentum. That's how you move from survival to strategy. And once you start seeing that progress, once you start feeling that control, everything changes. Your stress drops. Your confidence rises. Your decisions become clearer. Because now, you're not chasing money. You're directing it. And that's a completely different game. If this chapter made you reflect, if you've recognized patterns in your own life, pause for a moment and commit to one change. Just one. Maybe it's delaying a purchase. Maybe it's saving a percentage. Maybe it's tracking your spending. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be consistent. Because consistency is what builds everything. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to explore something even deeper, something that separates those who stay stressed about money from those who feel calm and in control, no matter their income level. The concept of enough. Because if you don't define what enough means, you'll spend your entire life chasing more without ever feeling satisfied. And that is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make. Chapter 6, The Power of Defining Enough. There is a question that most people never stop to answer, not because it's difficult, but because it's uncomfortable. How much is enough? Not how much you want, not how much others have, not what social media tells you to chase, but what is actually enough for you. Because if you never define that, you will spend your entire life running toward more money, more upgrades, more validation, more everything. And yet, never feeling like it's sufficient. That's the trap. Because the problem with more is that it has no finish line. You reach one level, and immediately your mind adjusts. Now you want the next, and the next, and the next. It never ends. That's why you see people with more money than they ever imagined, still feeling pressure, still feeling behind, still feeling like it's not enough, because they never defined what enough actually means. So they're not chasing freedom, they're chasing an illusion, and illusions are expensive. Now let's bring this back to money psychology. When you don't define enough, your spending becomes emotional. Your goals become unclear. Your satisfaction becomes temporary. Because there's always something else to compare to, always something more to chase, and that keeps you in motion, but not in progress. That's the difference. Motion feels productive, but without direction, it leads nowhere. And this is where the wealthy think differently. They don't just focus on earning, they focus on clarity. They define what they actually want their life to look like. They decide what matters, and just as importantly, what doesn't. Because every yes to something is a no to something else. Every dollar you spend is a decision about your future. And if those decisions are unclear, your results will be too. Now, here's something that might shift your perspective. Wealth is not having everything. It's having control over what you need. Let that land. Because control creates peace, and peace is what most people are actually searching for. Not the car, not the house, not the status, but the feeling that comes with it. Security, freedom, stability, the ability to breathe without pressure. And you don't need infinite money for that. You need clarity. You need discipline. You need alignment. Because without those, even unlimited income won't satisfy you. You'll just raise your standards and your stress with it. Now think about your own life. What are you actually trying to build? Not what you've been told to want, not what looks impressive, what genuinely matters to you. Is it time? Is it flexibility? Is it security? Is it freedom from stress? Because once you define that, everything becomes simpler. Your decisions become clearer. Your spending becomes intentional. Your priorities become focused. And suddenly, you're not chasing everything anymore. You're building something specific. That's power. Now here's where it gets practical. Instead of saying, I want more money, try defining what that actually means. I want enough to cover my needs, invest consistently, and have freedom over my time. That's different. That's measurable. That's actionable. And once you have that clarity, you stop making random decisions. You stop chasing distractions. You stop comparing yourself constantly. Because now you have direction, and direction eliminates noise. This is what playing offense looks like. You're not reacting to every opportunity, you're filtering them. You're not chasing every upgrade, you're evaluating them. You're not driven by impulse, you're guided by intention. And over time, that creates something incredibly valuable. Stability, not just financially, but mentally. Because you're no longer in a constant state of not enough. You're grounded, you're focused, you're in control. And that feeling is rare because most people never slow down long enough to define what they actually want. They just keep moving, keep chasing, keep reacting, and years go by without ever feeling satisfied. That's not a money problem, that's a clarity problem. So let me ask you something. Honestly, if your life stayed exactly the same financially for the next 5 years, would you feel okay? Or would you feel like you're falling behind? Because that answer reveals whether you're chasing growth or escaping discomfort, and those are very different things. Growth is intentional. Escaping is reactive. And only one of them leads to peace. Now here's a powerful shift to carry forward. Instead of measuring success by how much you have, start measuring it by how much control you feel. Because control is what money is supposed to give you. Not pressure, not anxiety, not constant comparison. Control. And if your current path isn't leading to that, it's time to adjust. Not drastically, not emotionally, strategically, step by step, decision by decision. Because you don't need to change everything overnight. You just need to start moving in the right direction, consistently. And that's what this audiobook is about. Not quick wins, not shortcuts, but real sustainable change. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to break down one of the most misunderstood emotions in money, fear. Because fear doesn't just stop people from taking risks, it also keeps them stuck in patterns that quietly limit their future. And once you understand how fear operates, you'll start seeing it everywhere, in your decisions, in your hesitation, in your habits, and more importantly, you'll learn how to move through it instead of being controlled by it. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 7. Fear is quiet, but it controls everything. Most people think fear is loud, obvious, easy to spot. But when it comes to money, fear is silent. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up as hesitation, as overthinking, as delay, as I'll start later. And because it's so subtle, Most people never recognize it. They don't say, I'm afraid. They say, I'm just being careful. I need more time. I'll wait until I'm ready. But what they're really doing is avoiding movement, avoiding risk, avoiding growth. Because fear is not just about losing money. It's about losing control. And for many people, control feels safer than opportunity, even if that control keeps them stuck. Now let's break this down. There are two types of fear when it comes to money: the fear of losing and the fear of not knowing. The fear of losing says, what if I invest and it goes wrong? What if I try and fail? What if I make a mistake? And so you stay still. You keep your money safe. You avoid risk. You choose certainty. But here's the problem. Safety doesn't create growth. It creates stagnation. And over time, stagnation becomes its own risk. Because while you're standing still, the world keeps moving. Prices rise, opportunities pass, time moves forward, and slowly, without realizing it, you fall behind. That's the hidden cost of fear. Now the second type, the fear of not knowing. This one is even more dangerous because it disguises itself as logic. I don't understand investing. I don't know where to start. I'm not ready yet. So you wait, you delay, you tell yourself you'll learn later. But later never comes. Because the truth is, you don't need to know everything to begin. You just need to know enough to take the first step. And yet, most people wait for perfect clarity, which means they never move. And that's exactly how fear keeps you stuck, quietly, effectively. Now here's how the wealthy think differently. They don't eliminate fear. They move with it. They understand that uncertainty is part of growth. They accept that mistakes will happen. They expect it. And because they expect it, they're not paralyzed by it. They act anyway, carefully, strategically, but they act. That's offense. Not reckless action, but intentional movement, because they understand something most people don't. The biggest risk is not losing money. It's never learning how to grow it. Let that hit you, because that's where many people stay stuck for years, avoiding small risks while exposing themselves to a much bigger one, a lifetime of financial limitation. Now let's make this real. Think about something you've been delaying. Maybe it's investing. Maybe it's saving consistently. Maybe it's learning about money. Maybe it's changing your habits. What's actually stopping you? Is it truly lack of knowledge? Or is it fear of making a mistake? Be honest, because that awareness is where your power is. Now here's something important to understand. Fear doesn't disappear with time. It grows with avoidance. Every time you delay, it gets stronger. Every time you hesitate, it becomes more convincing, until eventually it feels like truth. That's just not for me. I'm not good at this. I'll never figure it out. And just like that, fear becomes identity, and identity becomes limitation. But it doesn't have to stay that way, because fear can be retrained, not by thinking, but by doing. Small actions, small steps, small risks, repeated consistently. That's how you build confidence, not by waiting, but by moving. Now let's shift your perspective. Instead of asking, what if I fail? Start asking, what if I learn? Because every mistake is information, every failure is feedback, every step is progress, and the people who win are not the ones who avoid mistakes. They're the ones who learn faster, adapt quicker, and keep moving. That's the game. Now here's a powerful truth. You don't need courage to start. You need action to build courage. Let that sit. Because most people are waiting to feel ready. But readiness comes after movement. Confidence comes after action. Clarity comes after experience, not before. So if you're waiting, you're delaying your own growth, and time doesn't wait. Now let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, fear controls your decisions. You avoid risk. You stay in your comfort zone. You protect what little you have, but never expand it. When you're playing offense, you manage fear. You take calculated steps. You accept uncertainty, and you move forward anyway. That's the difference. And over time, that difference becomes massive because one path leads to limitation and the other leads to expansion. Now, here's a simple challenge for you. Identify one thing you've been avoiding financially, just one, and take a small step toward it. Not a big leap, not something overwhelming, just one step. Because action breaks fear every time. If this chapter is hitting you, if you're realizing how often fear has influenced your decisions, pause for a moment. Acknowledge it, not with judgment, with awareness, because awareness is the beginning of control, and control is what we're building. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to explore something just as powerful, but often overlooked: time. Because money can be earned, lost, and regained, but time, once it's gone, it's gone. And the way you use it determines everything. Chapter 8. Time is the real currency. Most people think money is their most valuable resource, but it's not. Money can be earned again, lost and rebuilt, multiplied, recovered. Time cannot. And yet, most people spend time carelessly while protecting money emotionally. Think about that. You'll hesitate before spending $50, but you'll give away hours of your day, scrolling, waiting, delaying, avoiding, without a second thought, because time feels invisible, but its impact is permanent. And when it comes to wealth, time is not just important, it's everything. Because money grows through time, not effort alone, not income alone, but time. This is where the wealthy think differently. They don't just ask, how much money can I make? They ask, how can I use time to make money grow? That's a completely different question, because now you're not just trading time for money, you're using time to multiply money. That's offense. Now, let's break this down in a way that changes how you see everything. There are two ways people approach money and time. The first is linear. You work, you earn, you spend, you repeat. Your income is tied directly to your time. If you stop working, the income stops. That's the most common path. That's defense. You're constantly maintaining, constantly producing, constantly staying active just to sustain your life. And that's exhausting. Now, the second approach is exponential. You work, you save, you invest, and over time, your money starts working, even when you're not. That's the shift from effort to leverage, from time dependency to time advantage. And once you understand this, everything changes, because now you're not just thinking about today's income. You're thinking about future growth. You're thinking about how today's decisions affect your life years from now. And this is where most people fall short, not because they're lazy, but because they underestimate time. They delay investing, they delay saving, they delay learning. They tell themselves, I'll start later, but later is expensive, because every year you delay, you lose compounding, you lose momentum, you lose opportunity, and you don't feel it immediately. That's what makes it dangerous, because the cost is invisible at first, but over time, it becomes massive. Now, here's a powerful truth. Time rewards consistency, not intensity. You don't need to do something extreme. You need to do something consistent. Saving a small amount regularly, investing consistently, making better decisions over time. Those actions compound quietly, powerfully, and eventually they create results that look unbelievable to others. But it wasn't luck. It was time, used correctly. Now let's bring this back to your life. How are you currently using your time? When it comes to money, are you thinking long-term or just managing short-term? Are you building something or just maintaining something? Because there's a difference, and that difference shows up years later. Now here's something that might shift your perspective. Every financial decision you make is a trade between present comfort and future freedom. Let that sit, because that's the real game. When you spend impulsively, you're choosing present comfort. When you save and invest, you're choosing future freedom, and neither is wrong. But the balance matters, because if you always choose the present, your future pays the price, and if you always ignore the future, you'll eventually feel it, financially, emotionally, mentally. Now, the wealthy understand this balance. They don't sacrifice everything today, but they prioritize tomorrow. They think ahead. They act early. They give time the opportunity to work for them. And that's what creates real wealth, not just effort, not just income, but patience. Now let's talk about something critical: delayed gratification. This is one of the most powerful skills you can develop. The ability to wait. The ability to say no now for something better later. And in a world built on instant gratification, that skill is rare, but it's valuable. Because every time you delay gratification, you're strengthening discipline. You're building control. You're aligning your actions with your future, and over time, that becomes your advantage. Now here's a question for you. What would your life look like if you made decisions based on your future self, not your current feelings? If every choice was filtered through, what will this do for me 5 years from now? How different would your behavior be? How different would your results be? Because that's how the wealthy think. They don't just live in the present, they build for the future, and they use time as their greatest tool. Now, here's a simple shift you can apply immediately. Start thinking in timelines, not moments. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this right now?" ask, "What does this cost me over time?" Because everything has a long-term impact. Everything. And once you start seeing that, your decisions change. Naturally, you pause more, you think deeper, you act smarter, because now you're not just reacting, you're planning. That's offense. Now let's connect this back to everything we've covered so far. Identity, intention, comparison, income, fear, all of it leads here, time. Because time is where all those factors play out over years, over decades, quietly. And the people who understand this win, not overnight, but inevitably. Because they're not just working hard, they're working smart. With time on their side, now here's your challenge. Start respecting your time. The way you respect your money. Protect it. Use it intentionally. Invest it wisely. Because your future is being built right now in how you spend your time today. And in the next chapter, we're going to uncover something that quietly controls how you use both time and money. Your habits. Because you don't build wealth through big decisions. You build it through small actions, repeated daily. And once you understand how habits shape your financial life, you'll realize something powerful. You've been building your future all along. You just didn't know it. Chapter 9. Your habits are writing your financial future. You don't become wealthy in one moment. You don't lose everything in one moment either. It happens slowly, quietly, through habits. The small things you do every day. The decisions that feel insignificant. The patterns you don't even question anymore. That's what builds your financial life. Not the big moves, not the rare opportunities, but the repeated behaviors, because habits don't feel powerful in the moment, but over time, they become everything. Let me show you what I mean. Spending a little extra every day doesn't feel like a problem. Skipping saving this month doesn't feel like a big deal. Delaying learning about money feels harmless. But repeat those patterns over years, and suddenly you're stuck, stressed, wondering how you got here. And the answer is simple: habits. Because habits compound, just like money does. Small actions, repeated consistently, leading to big outcomes. And here's the truth most people don't want to face. Your current financial situation is a reflection of your habits, not your intentions, not your goals, your habits. Because intentions don't create results, actions do. Repeated actions. Now this is where everything connects. Identity shapes your habits. Habits shape your actions. Actions shape your results. So if your results aren't where you want them to be, you don't just change your goals, you change your habits. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Most people try to change their financial life by making big, dramatic changes, extreme budgets, strict rules, sudden restrictions, and it works for a short time. Then it breaks because it's not sustainable, because real change doesn't come from intensity, it comes from consistency. And consistency is built through simple habits, not extreme ones. Now let's make this practical. Instead of trying to change everything, you focus on small, repeatable actions. Saving a fixed percentage automatically. Tracking your spending weekly. Pausing before every purchase. Learning something about money daily. These habits don't feel impressive. They don't feel dramatic, but they are powerful because they are consistent, and consistency is what builds everything. Now let's go deeper. Why do most people struggle with habits? Because they rely on motivation, and motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. It depends on mood, energy, circumstances, but habits don't rely on motivation. They rely on structure, systems, automation. That's why one of the most powerful things you can do is remove decision-making from your habits. Automate your savings, automate your investments, set rules in advance so you don't have to rely on willpower, because willpower fades, but systems stay. And this is something highlighted in behavioral discussions around money. When you automate positive financial actions, you remove the friction that causes most people to fail. Think about that. The easier something is, the more likely you are to stick with it. So instead of making things harder, you make them automatic, and that's how you win. Now here's another powerful idea. Your environment shapes your habits. If you're constantly exposed to spending, you'll spend more. If you're surrounded by distractions, you'll lose focus. If your environment encourages bad decisions, your habits will follow. That's why awareness matters. Because once you see your environment clearly, you can start adjusting it. You can remove triggers. You can reduce temptation. You can create systems that support your goals instead of working against them. Now let's connect this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, your habits are reactive. You spend when you feel like it. You save when you remember. You invest when you feel confident. Everything depends on emotion. When you're playing offense, your habits are structured. You save automatically. You invest consistently. You control your spending, not based on mood, but based on system. And that's the difference, because systems create stability, and stability creates growth. Now here's something important. Habits don't need to be perfect. They need to be consistent. You will make mistakes. You will slip. You will have moments where you fall back. That's normal. That's human. But what matters is returning to your habits, not abandoning them, because one mistake doesn't define you, but quitting does. So instead of aiming for perfection, aim for consistency, small wins, repeated daily. That's how you build momentum. And momentum is powerful, because once it starts, it carries you forward. Now let me ask you something. What are your current financial habits? Not what you plan to do, not what you say you'll do. What do you actually do? Every day? Because that's your reality. And if you want a different reality, you need different habits. So here's your challenge. Identify one habit that is hurting your financial life. Just one. And replace it with a better one. Not 10 habits. Not a complete overhaul. Just one. Because one habit, repeated consistently, can change everything. Now imagine this. What would your life look like if your habits were aligned with your goals? If every day you were making small decisions that moved you forward? How different would things be in 1 year, in 5 years? Because that's the power of habits. They don't show results immediately, but over time, they become undeniable. Now here's the truth. You don't need a new opportunity. You need better habits, because opportunities without habits are wasted. But habits without opportunities still create progress, and progress leads to opportunity. That's the cycle. And once you understand it, you stop waiting. You start building. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to explore something that quietly influences all your habits. Something that can either strengthen your discipline or destroy it completely. Your environment and the people around you. Because who you spend time with and what you're exposed to daily shapes your behavior more than you think. And once you see it clearly, you'll realize something powerful. Your environment is either helping you grow or keeping you stuck. Chapter 10. Your environment is quietly programming you. You might think your financial decisions are entirely your own, that every choice you make comes from logic, intention, and control. But look closer, because most of your behavior is influenced by what surrounds you, your environment, the people you talk to, the content you consume, the habits you see daily. All of it is shaping you, quietly, constantly. And if you're not aware of it, you'll adopt patterns that don't even belong to you. This is one of the most overlooked forces in financial psychology, because it doesn't feel obvious. It doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like normal. But normal is relative. What feels normal to one person feels extreme to another. What feels like enough to one feels like nothing to someone else. And that difference is shaped by environment. Let's make this real. If everyone around you spends impulsively, that becomes normal. If your circle values status over stability, you'll feel pressure to do the same. If your environment constantly promotes consumption, you'll consume more, not because you're weak, but because you're human. You adapt, you absorb, you mirror. That's how we're wired. Now, here's the dangerous part. You rarely question what feels normal. You just follow it without realizing that it might be limiting you. Because if your environment is financially undisciplined, you will struggle to stay disciplined. If your environment is reactive, you will react. If your environment is focused on short-term pleasure, you will prioritize the present over the future. That's not coincidence. That's influence. Now let's flip this. If your environment is intentional, you become intentional. If your environment values growth, you grow. If your environment is focused on building, you start building. That's the power of proximity. And it works, whether you're aware of it or not. So the question becomes, what is your environment doing to you? Is it helping you move forward or quietly holding you back? Because you don't rise above your environment easily. You adapt to it, unless you consciously choose otherwise. Now here's where this connects to wealth. The wealthy are very intentional about their environment, not just physically, but mentally. They control what they consume. They choose what influences them. They limit exposure to noise because they understand something critical. Your inputs determine your outputs. If you constantly feed your mind with distraction, your actions will reflect distraction. If you constantly see people spending, you'll normalize spending. If you're surrounded by people who don't think long-term, you'll struggle to think long-term. That's why environment matters so much, because it shapes your default behavior, and your default behavior is what determines your results. Now here's something to reflect on. Who are you spending the most time around? What kind of conversations are you having? What kind of mindset surrounds you daily? Because that's your current influence. And influence is powerful. Now this doesn't mean you need to cut people off. It doesn't mean you need to isolate yourself. It means you need to be aware, intentional, selective, because not every influence deserves your attention, and not every environment supports your growth. So you start making adjustments, small ones. You change what you consume. You follow content that educates instead of distracts. You spend more time learning and less time comparing. You seek out people who think differently, who challenge you, who inspire growth, because growth is contagious, just like stagnation is. Now, here's something important. Your environment is not just external. It's internal too. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your internal dialogue. That's your inner environment. And if that environment is negative, self-limiting, fear-driven, it will shape your actions just as much as the outside world. So you need to manage both, what you see and what you think, because both are programming you every day. Now let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, you let your environment control you. You absorb everything. You react to everything. You don't question it. You just follow it. When you're playing offense, you design your environment. You filter what you consume. You choose your influences. You protect your focus, because you understand that your environment is either an advantage or a liability, and that choice is yours. Now let me ask you something honestly. If someone lived your exact life for a year, same environment, same influences, same habits, would they get better results than you, or the same results? Because that answer reveals how much your environment is shaping you. Now here's your challenge. Take a moment and audit your environment. What are the top 5 influences in your life right now? Content, people, habits, conversations. Are they helping you grow or keeping you comfortable? Because comfort is often the enemy of progress. And if you want to change your results, you have to change your inputs, even slightly. Because small changes in environment lead to big changes in behavior over time. Now imagine this. What would happen if your environment fully supported your growth? If everything around you encouraged discipline, clarity, focus, how different would your life be? Because that's not a fantasy. That's a decision. And it starts with awareness. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to uncover something even deeper, something that connects your environment, your habits, and your identity, your emotional relationship with money. Because money is not just logical, it's emotional. And until you understand how your emotions influence your financial decisions, you will keep repeating patterns without realizing why. And once you see it clearly, you'll understand something powerful. You're not just managing money, you're managing yourself. Dear viewer, share your success story, even if it is small. It can motivate other people to visit the comment section and read it, and it can inspire them. Also, don't be shy about asking questions, and perhaps someone with more experience or someone who has been through this will share the answer. Remember, it is only through communication that people become stronger and better. Thank you. Chapter 11. Money is emotional before it is logical. Most people like to believe they make financial decisions logically, that they think things through, that they act based on reason. But if that were true, no one would overspend. No one would stay in debt. No one would repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Because logically, the answers are simple. Spend less than you earn. Save consistently. Invest long-term. Avoid unnecessary debt. That's not complicated. But if it were only about logic, everyone would be financially stable. And they're not. Why? Because money is emotional before it is logical. And until you understand your emotional relationship with money, you will keep making decisions that don't make sense, even to you. Let that sink in, because this is where real awareness begins. You're not just managing numbers. You're managing feelings, comfort, fear, validation, security, status, relief. All of these emotions show up in your financial decisions, whether you notice them or not. Now, let's break this down. Why do people spend money they don't need? Not because they lack intelligence, but because they're chasing a feeling of reward, a feeling of progress, a feeling of control, or sometimes a way to escape stress. That's emotional spending, and it's one of the most common patterns people fall into. You had a hard day, so you buy something. You feel behind, so you upgrade something. You feel pressure, so you distract yourself with spending, and in the moment, it feels good. Temporary relief, temporary satisfaction. But afterward, nothing really changes, except your balance. And over time, those emotional decisions add up. Now let's look at the other side. Why do some people avoid spending, even when they can afford it? Fear. Fear of losing. Fear of not having enough. Fear of going backward. So they hold on tightly, they restrict themselves, they avoid taking opportunities, they stay safe. But safety can also become a limitation, because money is meant to be used strategically, intentionally, not just protected. So whether it's overspending or over-restricting, both are emotional patterns. different behaviors, same root, emotion. And this is exactly what's discussed in deeper psychology conversations around money. People often sit at extremes, either spending too much or saving too much, because their behavior is driven by emotion, not balance. Now here's the key insight. Your financial behavior is a reflection of your emotional patterns, not your knowledge, not your intelligence, your patterns. And patterns can be changed, but only if you see them. So let's make this practical. The next time you're about to spend money, pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Not what you're buying, what you're feeling, because that's the real trigger. Are you bored, stressed, trying to reward yourself, trying to feel better? Because once you identify the emotion, you can decide differently. You can separate feeling from action, and that's where control begins. Now let's go deeper. Money is often tied to identity, to self-worth, to how you see yourself. If you feel successful, you might spend to reflect that. If you feel behind, you might spend to compensate. If you feel insecure, you might spend to prove something to others or to yourself. And that's dangerous because now money is not a tool. It's a signal, a way to communicate something. And when money becomes emotional signaling, it becomes unstable, unpredictable, reactive. That's when people start making decisions that don't align with their future because they're trying to fix a feeling with a purchase. But feelings don't stay fixed. They return, and the cycle continues. Now here's a powerful shift. Separate your emotions from your financial decisions, not by ignoring them, but by understanding them. Because emotions are not the enemy. They're signals. They tell you something is happening internally, but they shouldn't control your actions. That's the difference between awareness and reaction. Now let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, your emotions drive your money. You spend based on how you feel. You react to pressure. You seek comfort. When you're playing offense, you recognize your emotions, but you don't let them decide. You pause, you think, you choose. And that pause is everything because it creates space. Space between feeling and action. And in that space, you gain control. Now imagine this. What would your financial life look like if your decisions were not driven by emotion? If every choice was intentional, aligned, calm? How different would things be? Because that's what we're building. Not perfection, but awareness. Not restriction, but control. Now here's your challenge. For the next few days, pay attention to your emotions around money. When you spend, when you hesitate, when you feel pressure, just observe. Don't judge. Don't change anything yet. Just notice. Because awareness is the first step to transformation. And once you see your patterns clearly, you can start changing them. One decision at a time. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to explore something that quietly determines your financial future. Patience. Because in a world that rewards speed, the people who win with money are often the ones who move slower. Think longer and wait strategically. And once you understand why, you'll start seeing patience, not as weakness, but as power. Chapter 12. Patience is the hidden advantage. We live in a world that rewards speed, fast results, fast money, fast success. Everything's optimized for now. Instant delivery, instant feedback, instant gratification. And because of that, patience feels outdated, slow, unnecessary. But when it comes to money, patience is not just important. It's everything. Because wealth is not built quickly. It's built quietly, over time. And the people who understand this win, not because they're smarter, but because they're willing to wait. Now, let's be clear. Patience is not doing nothing. It's not waiting passively. It's active discipline. It's continuing to do the right things, even when you don't see immediate results. That's what makes it difficult, because your brain wants feedback. It wants progress you can see. It wants confirmation that what you're doing is working. But with money, the biggest results are invisible at first. You save, you invest, you stay consistent, and nothing seems to happen. Days pass, weeks pass, months pass, and it feels like you're standing still. That's where most people quit, because they mistake silence for lack of progress. But that silence is where the real growth is happening, below the surface, compounding, building, strengthening, and then one day it shows, and it looks like it happened fast. But it didn't. It was time, working quietly. Now here's the truth most people don't accept. The reason many people never build wealth is not lack of opportunity. It's lack of patience. They start, they try, they make some progress, then they stop. They get distracted. They chase something new. They look for faster results. And in doing so, they reset their progress. Again and again and again. That's the cycle. Starting, stopping, restarting, never staying consistent long enough for time to work. Now compare that to someone playing offense. They don't chase speed. They build consistency. They don't expect immediate results. They expect delayed outcomes. They trust the process, even when it's quiet, even when it feels slow, because they understand something powerful. Time rewards those who stay and punishes those who constantly switch. Let that sit with you, because this applies to everything: saving, investing, learning, habits, relationships. Everything that matters requires time and consistency. Now let's connect this back to psychology. Why is patience so difficult? Because it requires emotional control. It requires you to resist the urge to act impulsively, to chase quick wins, to compare yourself to others. And that's not easy, because your environment is constantly pushing speed. Get rich quick. Make money fast. Don't wait. And if you're not grounded, you'll get pulled into that. You'll start questioning your path. You'll start doubting your progress. You'll feel like you're behind, even when you're doing everything right. That's the danger, because patience doesn't look impressive in the short term, but it creates everything in the long term. Now, here's a powerful shift. Stop measuring progress daily. Start measuring it yearly, because real change is not visible in days. It's visible in time. And once you shift your perspective, you become calmer, more focused, more consistent, because you're not chasing immediate validation anymore. You're building something real. Now let's make this practical. Instead of asking, "Why am I not seeing results yet?" ask, "Am I doing the right things consistently?" Because that's the only question that matters. If the answer is yes, then time will take care of the rest. Now here's something important. Patience does not mean inaction. It means disciplined action, repeated over time. You still show up, you still save, you still invest, you still learn, but you don't expect instant rewards. You trust the process, and that trust is what separates those who succeed from those who stay stuck. Now imagine this. What would your life look like if you committed to one financial habit for the next 5 years? No switching, no quitting, no chasing something new, just consistency. how different would things be? Because that's how wealth is built, not through intensity, but through endurance. Now let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, you're impatient. You react quickly. You chase fast results. You abandon plans when they don't work immediately. When you're playing offense, you're patient. You stay consistent. You think long term. You trust the timeline. And that difference is everything. Because one path leads to frustration and the other leads to freedom. Now here's your challenge. Choose one financial behavior and commit to it long term. Not for a week, not for a month, for the long run, because that's where the results are. And if this chapter resonated with you, if you realized how often impatience has influenced your decisions, take a moment, lock it in, because this might be one of the most important shifts you make. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to explore something that connects patience, fear, and decision-making, risk. Because most people misunderstand risk completely. They either avoid it or take too much of it, and both can be dangerous. But once you understand how to see risk clearly, you'll start making smarter decisions with more confidence and less fear. Chapter 13. Risk is not what you think it is. Most people hear the word risk and immediately think of danger, loss, uncertainty, something to avoid. And because of that, they spend their entire life trying to eliminate risk, playing safe, staying comfortable, avoiding anything that feels uncertain. But here's the truth. You cannot eliminate risk. You can only choose which risk you take. Let that sit with you, because this is where most people misunderstand money completely. They think not investing is safe. They think staying in the same position is secure. They think avoiding change protects them. But what they don't see is the risk of staying the same, the risk of inflation, the risk of lost time, the risk of missed opportunities, the risk of never learning. And those risks are often bigger than the ones they're trying to avoid. Now let's break this down clearly. There are two types of risk: visible risk and invisible risk. Visible risk is what most people fear: investing money, starting something new, making a change, because it feels immediate. You can see the potential downside. You can imagine the loss. And so you hesitate, you delay, you avoid. But invisible risk is what most people ignore: doing nothing, staying the same, repeating patterns, wasting time, because it doesn't feel dangerous, it feels safe. But over time, it compounds, and its impact becomes massive. That's the danger, because invisible risk doesn't feel urgent until it's too late. Now, this is where the wealthy think differently. They don't avoid risk. They evaluate it. They ask better questions. Not, is this risky? But, which risk is greater? The risk of action or the risk of inaction? That's a completely different perspective, because now you're not trying to avoid risk. You're trying to choose the right one. And that's how you move forward. Now let's make this practical. Imagine two people. The first avoids investing, keeps everything in cash, feels safe, no volatility, no uncertainty. But over time, their money loses value, opportunities pass, growth never happens. That's invisible risk. The second person invests carefully, learns, makes mistakes, adjusts, and over time, builds something, not perfectly, but consistently. That's managed risk. And that difference changes everything. Now, here's something important to understand. Risk is not about being reckless. It's about being informed. It's about understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. because reckless risk is driven by emotion, impulsive decisions, chasing quick wins, ignoring consequences. That's dangerous. But calculated risk is different. It's thoughtful, strategic, intentional. You understand the downside, you accept it, and you move forward anyway. That's how progress happens. Now let's connect this back to fear. Fear makes risk feel bigger than it is. It exaggerates the downside. It focuses on what could go wrong, but it ignores what could go right. And more importantly, it ignores the cost of doing nothing. And that's where most people stay stuck, because they're only looking at one side. Now here's a powerful shift. Instead of asking, "What if I lose?" start asking, "What do I lose if I don't act?" Because that question reveals the invisible risk, the time you're losing, the growth you're delaying, the opportunities you're missing. And once you see that clearly, your perspective changes, because now doing nothing doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels expensive. Now, let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, you avoid risk. You stay safe. You protect what you have, but you don't grow. When you're playing offense, you manage risk. You take calculated steps. You move forward, even with uncertainty, because you understand that growth requires movement, and movement involves risk. That's the game. Now here's something else to understand. Every level of life has risk. Staying where you are has risk. Moving forward has risk. Changing direction has risk. So the goal is not to eliminate it. It's to choose it wisely. And that choice is what separates those who stay stuck from those who build something real. Now let me ask you something honestly. What risk are you currently avoiding? And what is it costing you? Not just financially, but in time, in growth, in opportunity. Because that cost is real, even if you don't see it immediately. Now here's your challenge. Identify one calculated risk you've been avoiding, something small, something manageable, and take a step toward it. Not blindly, not emotionally, but intentionally. Because action is how you build confidence, and confidence is how you expand. Now imagine this. What would your life look like if you stopped avoiding risk and started managing it? If you made decisions based on long-term growth instead of short-term comfort, how different would your path be? Because that's what we're building, not fearlessness, but clarity, not recklessness, but strategy. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to uncover something that connects everything you've learned so far and determines whether you actually apply it. Discipline. Because knowledge without discipline changes nothing, and discipline is the bridge between understanding and results. Chapter 14. Discipline is the real difference. There is a moment in every person's life where they understand what they should do. They know they should save. They know they should invest. They know they should stop wasting money. They know, but they don't do it. Not consistently, not long enough, not seriously enough. And that's where the gap exists, not between knowledge and opportunity, but between knowledge and discipline. Because knowledge tells you what to do. Discipline makes you do it. And without discipline, everything you've learned so far means nothing. Let that sink in. Because this is where most people stop. They listen. They understand. They feel motivated. But they don't change. And a week later, they're back in the same patterns, the same habits, the same results. Not because they're incapable, but because they lack discipline. Now here's the truth most people avoid. Discipline is not comfortable. It's not exciting. It's not easy. It's doing what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. That's what makes it powerful, because discipline doesn't depend on mood. It doesn't depend on motivation. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It depends on your decision, your commitment, your standard, and that's the difference between those who stay stuck and those who move forward. Now let's break this down. Why do people struggle with discipline? Because they negotiate with themselves. They say, I'll start tomorrow. I'll skip today. It's just this once. And every time they do that, they weaken their standard. They train themselves to choose comfort over progress. And over time, that becomes their identity. Someone who delays, someone who avoids, someone who never follows through. That's how discipline is lost, not in big moments, but in small decisions, repeated daily. Now let's flip this. Every time you choose discipline, you strengthen your identity. You prove to yourself that you can follow through, that you can stay consistent, that you can control your actions, and that builds confidence, real confidence, not based on words, but based on evidence. Because confidence is built through action, not thought. Now here's something powerful. Discipline creates freedom, not restriction. Most people think discipline limits them, that it takes away enjoyment, that it makes life harder. But the opposite is true. Discipline gives you control, and control gives you freedom. Freedom from stress, freedom from chaos, freedom from reacting. Because when you're disciplined, you're not constantly fixing problems, you're preventing them. And that creates space, space to think, space to grow, space to live. Now let's connect this back to money. When you're disciplined financially, you don't stress about bills. You don't panic about expenses. You don't feel out of control because you've built structure, consistency, stability, and that stability is what most people are actually looking for. Not more money, but less stress. Now here's the key insight. Discipline is not about doing everything right. It's about doing the right things repeatedly. Even when it's boring, even when it's slow, even when no one is watching. Because that's where real growth happens. In the quiet, in the routine, in the consistency. Now let's make this practical. Instead of trying to become more disciplined, you focus on specific actions. Save automatically. Track your spending. Stick to your plan. Follow your system. Simple, repeatable, clear. Because discipline is easier when it's structured, when it's defined, when it's not based on decision, but on system. Now here's something important. Discipline is not built overnight. It's built through repetition, through showing up, through doing the work, even when it's hard. And over time, it becomes part of who you are, not something you force, but something you live. That's when everything changes. Because now, you're not relying on motivation. You're relying on identity, and identity is stable. Now let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, you rely on motivation. You act when you feel like it. You stop when it gets hard. You stay inconsistent. When you're playing offense, you rely on discipline. You act regardless of how you feel. You stay consistent. You follow through. And that difference creates everything. Now let me ask you something honestly. Where in your life are you relying on motivation instead of discipline? Because that's where your progress is breaking. That's where your results are inconsistent. And that's where your focus needs to go. Now, here's your challenge. Choose one area of your financial life and apply discipline to it. Not everything, just one, and commit to it. No negotiation, no excuses, just consistency. Because once you build discipline in one area, it spreads, it strengthens, it becomes part of you. Now imagine this. What would your life look like if you followed through on everything you started? If your actions matched your intentions? If your discipline was unbreakable? Because that version of you is not far away. It's built one decision at a time. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to explore something that ties everything together. Freedom. Because at the end of the day, money is not the goal. Freedom is. And once you understand what real financial freedom looks like, you'll stop chasing the wrong things and start building the right ones. Chapter 15. Freedom is the real goal. Let's stop for a moment and strip everything back to the truth. Why do you want money? Not the surface answer, not the automatic response, the real reason. Is it the car, the house, the lifestyle? Or is it something deeper? Because if you're honest, money is not the goal. Freedom is. Freedom to choose, freedom to say no, freedom to walk away, freedom to live without constant pressure. That's what people are really chasing. But here's the problem. Most people chase money in a way that destroys their freedom. They work more. They take on more responsibility. They increase their expenses. They build a life that requires constant maintenance. And suddenly, they have more money, but less freedom. That's the paradox. Because if your lifestyle grows as fast as your income, you're not free. You're just operating at a higher level of dependency. And dependency is the opposite of freedom. Now, this is where the wealthy think differently. They don't just ask, how much can I earn? They ask, how much control can I create? Because control is what creates freedom. Control over your time, control over your decisions, control over your life. And that doesn't come from spending more. It comes from needing less and managing better. Now let's define this clearly. Financial freedom is not having unlimited money. It's having enough to live life on your terms. Let that sit. Because that definition changes everything. It removes the endless chase. It removes the comparison. It removes the pressure to constantly do more and replaces it with clarity, with direction, with intention. Now think about this. What would your life look like if you didn't have to worry about money every day? Not in a fantasy way. In a realistic way, what would change? Would you work differently? Would you spend your time differently? Would you think differently? Because that vision is what you should be building toward, not someone else's version of success. Your version. Now here's something important. Freedom is built slowly. It's not one big moment. It's small decisions, repeated over time, saving consistently, investing regularly, controlling your spending, avoiding unnecessary debt. Those actions don't feel dramatic, but they create something powerful. Options. And options are freedom. Because when you have options, you're not trapped, you're not forced, you're not dependent. You can choose. And that changes everything. Now let's connect this back to psychology. Why do so many people struggle to reach freedom? Because they prioritize appearance over control. They want to look successful before they become stable. They want the lifestyle before they build the foundation. And that keeps them stuck. Because now they're maintaining an image instead of building a future. That's defense. Now, offense is different. You focus on the foundation first. You build stability. You create margin. You invest in your future, even if it doesn't look impressive, because you understand that real freedom is invisible at first. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it's powerful. And over time, it becomes undeniable. Now here's a powerful truth. The more you need money, the less freedom you have. And the less you need, the more control you gain. That's why defining enough matters so much. Because once you know what's enough, you stop chasing endlessly. You start building intentionally. And that's where peace begins. Now let me ask you something honestly. Are you building a life that requires constant income to sustain? Or are you building a life that becomes easier over time? Because that difference is everything. One path leads to pressure, the other leads to freedom. Now here's your challenge. Define what financial freedom means to you, not in vague terms, in specifics. What does your life look like? What does your time look like? What does your financial situation look like? Make it real. Because clarity creates direction, and direction creates progress. Now imagine this. What would change if every decision you made was aligned with that vision of freedom? How different would your habits be? How different would your priorities be? Because that's the shift. From reaction to intention. From survival to strategy. Now here's something to remember. Freedom is not built in the future. It's built in the present. Through your daily decisions, through your habits, through your discipline. And every step you take either moves you closer or keeps you where you are. Now let that sit. Because this is where everything comes together. Identity, habits, time, discipline, risk, all of it leads here. Freedom. And the question is, are your current actions building it or delaying it? Now, in the next chapter, we're going to go even deeper into something that determines whether you ever reach that freedom. Consistency at scale. Because it's not just about doing the right things, it's about doing them long enough and at the right level to create exponential results. And once you understand that, you'll stop underestimating your own potential. If you enjoy these audiobooks and want to support the channel, consider joining our private members community. Members get early access to new audiobooks and exclusive wealth lessons. Chapter 16, Consistency at Scale Changes Everything. Most people understand consistency, at least on the surface. They know they should save regularly. They know they should invest over time. They know they should build habits. But what they don't understand is scale, because consistency alone is not enough. It has to grow. It has to evolve. It has to compound. Otherwise, you stay in motion, but not in acceleration. Let me explain. Imagine someone saving a small amount every month. They're consistent, they're disciplined, they're doing the right thing, but they never increase it, never improve it, never expand it. What happens? They make progress, but it's slow, limited, linear. Now imagine someone else. They start the same way, small, consistent, disciplined, but over time, they increase, they improve, they expand, they grow their income, they grow their investments, they scale their habits. Now, something different happens. Their growth becomes exponential, not because they started bigger, but because they scaled. That's the difference between maintaining and building, between stability and expansion. And most people never make that shift. They stay consistent, but they stay small. Because scaling requires something more. It requires awareness, effort, intentional growth. Now here's the truth. Your habits should evolve as you evolve. Your financial behavior should grow as your capacity grows. Because if your income increases, but your habits stay the same, you're limiting your potential. And if your habits improve, but your actions stay small, you're holding yourself back. So the goal is not just consistency, it's progressive consistency. Doing the right things at a higher level over time. Now let's connect this to money. When you first start, saving anything is progress. Learning anything is progress. Investing anything is progress. But as you grow, you need to increase your standard, increase your expectations, increase your actions. Because what got you here will not get you there. That's the shift. And this is where many people plateau. They start strong. They build habits. They create momentum. But then they stop evolving. They get comfortable. They stay at the same level. And over time, their growth slows. Not because they failed, but because they stopped scaling. Now let's bring this back to offense versus defense. When you're playing defense, you aim to survive, maintain, stay stable. And that's important, but it's not enough. When you're playing offense, you aim to expand, grow, scale. You're not just protecting what you have, you're building more. And that mindset changes everything. Because now, you're not just focused on stability, you're focused on progress, real progress. Now here's something powerful. Scaling doesn't require perfection, it requires intention. You don't need to double everything overnight. You need to improve gradually, consistently. That's how compounding works, not in sudden jumps, but in steady growth. Now let's make this practical. If you're saving, increase your savings rate over time. If you're investing, increase your contributions. If you're learning, expand your knowledge. If you're earning, develop your skills. Everything should be moving forward, not staying still. Now here's a key insight. Growth creates opportunity. When you improve your habits, you create space. When you create space, you see opportunities. When you see opportunities, you act differently. And that leads to more growth. That's the cycle. And it only starts when you decide to scale. Now let me ask you something. Where in your financial life have you stayed at the same level for too long? Be honest. Because that's where your next growth is. Not in starting something new, but in expanding. Now before we close, let me leave you with something simple. A line you can carry with you. A line you can come back to. A line that defines everything you've learned. Your future is not something you wait for. It's something you build. Read that again. Feel it, because that's the truth. And now, the question is yours. What are you going to build? If this audiobook made you think, if it made you reflect, if it made you see things differently, take a moment. Commit to yourself. You can even write it down or share it. What is the one thing you're going to change? Because saying it makes it real. And if you know someone who needs this message, someone who feels stuck, share it with them, not to impress them, but to help them, because sometimes one idea at the right moment changes everything. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want more audiobooks like this, then subscribe, not for content, for consistency, for accountability, for growth, because this is not just a video. This is a movement, a shift, a different way of thinking. And the more you stay connected, the more you reinforce it. Now take a breath. Let everything settle, because this is where it begins, not when the video ends, but when you decide. And remember, you don't rise to your goals. You fall to your standards, so raise them, live them, and build something real. This is your moment. Use it.